Do people with mental health challenges get treated the same way when looking at recognition for their performance? Shouldn't they? So this was, I guess it does require some sort of a leap, I think, when looking at the context for this question. And I think you can kind of see this from a few different angles. One is that, when I look at the research that we do around mental health in our industry, the reality is that, half of us are experiencing something. We're having some sort of challenge in our mental health. And so when you look at how people are recognized and rewarded, there's people that are dealing with stuff that are recognized and rewarded for the amazing job that they do. There's a lot of pressure, I think, at the moment, partly perhaps because of some of the work that we've done, but to kind of talk more about your mental health. But you might not be ready for it yet, or you might not feel comfortable doing it. But the reality is, because this has been going on for so long, people are performing well. This isn't suddenly a thing where, if you disclose it now, but you've been experiencing something for 5 to 10 years, that it's affecting your performance. You're actually just choosing to say, hey, look, this is something that I go through and here's how I manage it. One of the things that we've talked about in the past is being able to help other people understand what your mental health challenge is, how you deal with it, how you adapt, and just be able to explain to people what support you might need, but that actually it's not affecting your job necessarily. So I think that's quite a big one to sort of just to think about when it comes to how we might treat people or how people might be treated differently. I can tell you that stigma is improving. That's in the results in the mental health study next week. So we've seen actually quite rapid improvements in terms of the stigma associated with mental health. It also is better, if I remember rightly, for younger people. So younger people are actually having, much more likely to talk about their mental health at work than some of the older people in our industry. So that's a good thing. The other thing, I guess, is like, should people be treated differently? I mean, people shouldn't be treated differently unless they need to be. And I think if you disclose a mental health problem at work, then there is an element of your workplace having a duty of care to make reasonable adjustments for you to be able to still do your job, but also get the support that you need. I certainly know of an example where someone was very clear with a business that they had a psychiatrist appointment at 2 p.m. every Tuesday. And then someone went and scheduled in an internal meeting over the top of it. That would not be, that basically that's an unreasonable adjustment. We have to be able to make the kind of right adjustments for people to be able to, function at work, do their job, and do a great job, by the way, but not to put things in the way of being able to get the support and the help that they need. And then finally, we actually did an asking for a friend yesterday, private one. So we've started offering private asking for a friends now for businesses. So if you're interested in that, let us know. But there was a leader on that call that said how, she's had high anxiety for a number of years, and she's been able to find methods to control her anxiety, to understand when it is becoming something that might be an obstacle and how to manage it. And, she's now made managing director of of quite a large agency. And so it shouldn't necessarily have to stop you from getting to where you want to go, but it's definitely something to think about how you manage it and how you can take control of it. And I've heard people talk about, and you probably had this, Tara, of like anxiety almost as a superpower, like you can use it for good. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that is, often you hear the words anxiety and the word kind of crippling comes out, but actually you can also use it for good and for, to get you to do things as well.
Absolutely. I think there's an interesting thing that I've noticed. So I'm a bit of a wordsmith. I really, really focus on people's language when I'm working with them and when I'm talking to them. And one of the things that I think is important is for us to understand that anxiety might not necessarily actually be anxiety, because it could be nervousness, it could be excitement, it could be uncertainty, right? There are a lot of different things. The same can be said for depression, right? Mm-hmm. People will say, I'm depressed. And I go, well, actually, no, you're not meeting the criteria that frames what depression really is. Perhaps you're feeling lethargic. Perhaps you're experiencing low mood. Perhaps you're feeling like your motivation is low, though the other parts of being depressed may not necessarily be there. And when we start overusing these kinds of labels, and that's why at the Tara Clinic, we don't even use labels. I just never talk about it from that frame of mind, because unless it's going to benefit the client for knowing what the thing is that they are diagnosed with, because for some people it can be really valuable to know, oh, it's a thing. I'm not crazy. It's a thing. Great. I can work on the thing. But if we're just throwing around anxiety, depression, whatever it may be, then our brain, even though our brain technically knows what we know about language, these words are considered like catastrophic languages. And so what that means is that our mush, our threat response switches on, because if I'm actually depressed, then I might be feeling suicidal. So the brain is just going to be like, well, hang on a second, we're literally potentially going to die. So if we're saying that I'm depressed, but I'm actually not, then we might be adding another problem onto the original problem that we have that we could just sort out instead. So just being really mindful of the language that we use around mental health and how we're actually feeling. And one of the resources that I love, and I don't actually have a link to it, annoyingly. I will have to make that a link. Anyway, you can probably just Google emotions wheel, and I imagine that there'll be a number of them that come up. We've just created our own at the Tara Clinic. But what it does is it shows you there are really sort of general words in the middle of the circle. And then as you go further out of the circle, the words become more specific. So rather than just saying you're angry, you can actually go further out to the edge and see, am I, frustrated, or am I enraged? And those two things are probably under the same category of angry, but the advice that you would give a friend if they said either of those two things would be very different. So the more clear we can be around how we're actually feeling in any given moment is really valuable to not only tell you what you need, but also to communicate to other people, like your workplace, what you need from them. So rather than saying, I have anxiety, it's like, okay, great. What do you actually need? What is, when you're experiencing anxiety, how do you feel? What is truly going on for you? And how can someone else provide you with, or what do you need to do to provide yourself with the management of that moment? And that can be something that you would benefit from seeing a professional about, because they can help you to learn all of those tools and strategies that you can then teach to the people who are around you in your team and your management. But in terms of recognition for their performance, I mean, gosh, what was that? Wasn't it Van Gogh who had like intense psychosis for the majority of his life? And he's, a super celebrated, artist. And I think, like you said, there is a superpower in everything. Sometimes it can be how we choose to look at something. And so that's why, again, if we really, really connect to the language that we use around different things and the way that we're feeling and how we communicate, it truly will change the way you experience your world.
So let's stick with anxiety, because the next question actually goes, I think we can take that on a little bit further, which is, that kind of using it in a way as a superpower.